Okay, so our last talk in this session is going to be given by Maria, who's going to talk about Dataveillance.
Am I audible to everyone? No. Is it better? Oh, perfect. Yep. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Sameen. I'm a PhD student at the University of Bristol, and the talk which I'm going to present today is about the Dataveillance, but in Is it better now? Okay. So yeah, I'm a PhD student at the University of Bristol, and I'm working on dark patterns. But the talk which I'm going to present today is about the Dataveillance as an overlook side of dark patterns. So this work has been done under the supervision of Professor Wes Rashid, who is also the second author of this talk. So let's now dive into this topic by first understanding the term dark patterns. So basically, dark patterns are the types of user interfaces which are intentionally crafted or designed to manipulate the online users into making certain choices or decisions which are not either in the best favor of the online users or not intentional from the online user side, thus benefiting only the hosting platforms or the online services. Whereas the dataveillance itself is a combination of two terms, data and surveillance, hence dataveillance. So the idea of this term is to refer the process of profiling online users based on the data trail that has been generated through their online activities or interaction with the online platforms. Now the question is how these two terms, dark patterns and dataveillance, come into the play, as in what's the relation of these two terms in together, and why should we concern about them when we talk about dataveillance and dark patterns together. So we have seen that over the past few years, there are three critical things happen. One is the value of the data or the value of the inferences that can be drawn from the data collected has significantly increased. Second is that organizations have become more data hungry because their revenues and profits are now being very dependent on the users' data. And third is a lot of regulation authorities and legal bodies have come into the play with a lot of regulations enforcing ethical practices around the data collection, processing, and retention of users' data. So in this cat and mouse chase, where organizations are looking for as much data as they can collect from the users while making sure that they can elude all the ethical laws and regulations or elude them from these regulations and could, as you know, elude them from heavy charges or fines, they come up with different approaches and techniques with which they can collect as much data as they want to. And among those approaches, one is the utilization of dark patterns on their platforms. So what they have done is that they have started using dark patterns to nudge or trick the users into making more data disclosure choices. So now they can constantly monitor the online users, thus exploiting their privacy rights. Dark patterns can be of different categories, which can be used on different online platforms for numerous purposes. You can witness them, or these are prevalent on various platforms ranging from your browser to your video games platform to your entertainment websites to even e-commerce platforms. So now let's have a look at the evidences across various online platforms. So starting with the single sign-ons and OAuth, these are the most prevalent and common type of dark patterns which are utilized on various online platforms for login services. So you can see that as an online user, when we use the single sign-ons or OAuth, we are not very ensured that what extra data would be collected, shared, or processed with the third parties, or the data that we have give up on one platform, how would that be shared, or exactly that amount of data would be shared with the third parties, which are taking facilities from other platforms. On top of that, as an end user, unless we explicitly log ourselves out from these single sign-ons, the online hosting platform services which are providing single sign-ons would kept us logged into their accounts and track our online activities or interaction with the rest of the platforms. Another example is about pre-selection, which is nowadays a kind of a default options in a lot of privacy and security settings. So as you can see over here, that unless you navigate through a lot of pages, or if you see at the very corner over here, it has already been set as on, or already been set to yes. So these are the kind of things which in terms of dark patterns are labeled as bad defaults, where the things are already being set up in the favor of the organization and users have to navigate these options to turn them off. Or there can be cases like these, where companies or organization started to frame statements for data collection in a way that can make you guilty if you don't opt for those options. For example, in this case, if you look over here, they have mentioned about your face recognition technology, that if you want for this option, they might not be able to help you in detecting impersonation attacks. However, this is not about the thing that they have highlighted, it's about the way they have framed the statement and the way they have only highlighted the one aspect of why they are collecting this data. So this is a mere illusion of providing a control over your data, however, it isn't. In this case, you can see cookie banners, again, a very prevalent these days on almost all the websites. So there are two types of dark patterns over here, starting with the trick question. So you can see that we have accept all cookies, and in the very bottom of it is the refuse non-essential cookies. It doesn't say that refuse cookies, it says refuse non-essential cookies. That is using the double negatives to confuse the user. Another thing is the visual interference, that the accept and reject button, though it's not a refuse button, but still the way it has been presented, the color of the button is same, and they are placed adjacent to each other. So the person who has shallow attention or is in a kind of a rush might end up accepting the cookies, or the user won't have any option if the user don't want to opt those cookies, is kind of end up having cookies anyway. Over here, we have the example of immoral accounts. So another problem which is getting quite prevalent these days is that if we delete an account, would that also ensure that the data would also be deleted, or the companies would still retain the data? So in this case, companies delete the account but kept a part of information which is associated with the online user and still keep it without informing the user to track the online activities. This is an example from the game Farmville. So even in the video games, dark patterns have now been started, companies have started embedding dark patterns to monitor their online players' activities. So in this case, Farmville has been, online players has witnessed dark patterns like friend spam, in which the social network has been monitored, and based on their social network, their interaction and their connections have been also observed, after which impersonation types of dark patterns have been utilized to market the relevant stuff to their social network or try to pretend or influence their related social network decisions or choices. Some other evidences, starting with the e-commerce platforms. So e-commerce platforms, like in the case of Amazon, they have been also charged with complaint where they have hide the option of delete account under several layers of their platform or workflows, which is thus making it difficult for the online user to navigate those privacy options or delete account options, and making it tedious task that a lot of online users end up having their account simply left out because they don't want to spend too much effort and time in looking for these options. Also on the social networking websites, dark patterns, which a category of dark pattern which is prevalent or quite frequently used as shadow user profiles. So the aim of having this type of dark pattern is to basically generate the profiles of their account holders. But nowadays, companies are also using these type of dark patterns to generate the persona of non-account holders by navigating the statuses or profiles or pictures or whatever the content being shared by the account holders, and look into the stuff and start generating the personas of non-account holders. So the conclusion and the takeaway from this talk is basically we shouldn't be only concerned about having dark patterns, but we should also concern about having dark patterns in a sense that they can be used in various numerous ways for different purposes. And in this case, it's getting quite critical that they are now being used to nudge online users to make more data disclosure choices. Another takeaway is that, as evident or has been shown under the different evidences, that the dark patterns which are not categorized as a privacy intrusive or privacy related category, they can also be used to nudge or enforce privacy, less privacy intrusive, more privacy intrusive options, in a sense that, for example, in the case of confirm shaming can be used. However, it is not being categorized as a privacy based category, dark pattern category, but it can be used for enforcing or making users to make less privacy choices. So here are some of the references where you can refer and look into the examples where they have explained things. So I'm happy to take questions now, and then I'll show some of the interfaces and discuss with you whether you feel those as manipulative designs or not, and if you think they are manipulative, in which ways they are manipulative, and if not, then why not, and if you are confused that whether you should classify them as a manipulative or not, then why is it that so? So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Then I think we should start with the kind of clarifying questions, because it sounds like you have kind of a discussion pathway already set up. Yeah. Okay, cool. So do you have a clarifying question, or does anyone have questions in, like, they don't understand something or want to ask?
Feel free to type them also on the lib.
Yeah, especially for the online people. But everyone understood you.
Okay.
Yes, it is on. Wonderful. Awesome presentation. Thank you so much. I was wondering what your thoughts are. You use the word manipulation, dark patterns sort of interchangeably, and I know there's a lot of debate in privacy land about the terminology that we're using. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on manipulative design versus dark patterns, or what is the most useful term for this?
Okay, thank you for the question. This is something which is very important as well. I mean, like, for the dark pattern is a kind of a buzzword in our field, as in like our field, I mean, as in like in the dark patterns field, but it's now being interchanged or can be translated with its synonyms like manipulative design, deception designs, or what else you can say, yeah, a kind of a choice architectures, manipulative choice architecture. So there are different synonyms for it, but they all hint towards the same properties. So it's all about the properties of designs which are intentionally manipulative or not in favor of the online users.
Just because when I've spoken with game designers or designers generally, and I talk, mention the term manipulative design, they look at me with blank eyes and then say, "You mean designy design?" With the premise that all design is like sort of fundamentally manipulative. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that. And personally, I think that the dark patterns, because of its negative connotation, is especially useful in this space. But curious. So
I want to let Maria make sure that she gets into the discussion points that she made, and then I think if we have kind of this discussion as we go. Sorry. I just want to make sure you have time for your slides, but feel free to respond before you jump in.
Yeah. So if I've understood your question correctly, you are saying that why do these type, I mean, like, all the design patterns are manipulative, right? So what's my stake on, sorry, what?
we can talk about this afterwards. I apologize.
No, I mean, like, no, you have a really good question. That's why I'm asking that.
The idea that design is sort of fundamentally manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
So should the focus be on the manipulation effect of design, or should it be on negative consequences of that manipulation?
Okay, so that's a really interesting question, and let me clarify this bit as well. So when you talk about the design, so there's like a kind of overarching kind of a definition of it. So what we usually call in the thing you are referring to is online choice architectures. So online choice architecture is kind of a power set, and under that we have different types of designs like sludge, nudge, dark patterns, and they have different purposes and definitions associated to it. So the dark pattern one is intentionally manipulative and have negative consequences, whereas if you see about the different design patterns, it entirely depends or is subjective to the platform, in a sense that the way they are being utilized or prompt to the user, presented to the user, is completely subjective. So a lot of people or the scholars in my field, as in like who are working on this patterns sort of field, they have still in the argument that whether we should associate the positive or negative term to it, because it's all I mean, like there are a lot of notion around it whether we should classify this as a neutral as well, because people think that if it's subjective, then it should be neutral, whereas people thought that it can be either positive or negative. So I will give you an example on it. That let's suppose there was a study in which they mentioned that we are going to present a nagging or a kind of a pop-up to the user whenever user posts anything on this as a status. So to help the users in making effective choices, in a sense that whenever they post about something, alcohol, party stuff, which could potentially harm their society status, or maybe their boss or like work colleagues are added on the social network, which could potentially damage their image in the workspace. So what they have done is that they've proposed an idea of having nags or pop-ups which could, analyze the text of their status, and based on that, it will then give a kind of a pointers to them that this status is about alcohol or the party stuff or this. Would you still like to post this? So if you think in that sense, this is a kind of a good nudge, right? But if I use this in a space, let's suppose take a games one, because I have analyzed a lot of games by now. So in the games, let's suppose if you end up having some sort of help or bonus points or something, which you need to pass the certain level to go or to move to the next level. So what they can do is that they started having a pressured sort of or anchoring effect that buy this, to nudge you that this is a critical thing, otherwise you won't be able to proceed to the next level. So you as a user or online player who is competitive or have this manipulative psychology, they just play around with your psychology and asked you to pay a hefty amount for that one, because they know that you are now in a need of it, right? So in that sense, dark pattern is manipulative intentionally, but if you're talking about other design patterns, it depends on which platforms they are being utilized. Hope that answers your question. Perfect. Okay. So as I have presented an evidence of a cookie banner from the Twitter page, so I talked about the two types of dark patterns, trick questions and visual interference. So if I compare this type of cookie banner to the previous one, do you still think this one is manipulative or is still violating your privacy or is still not a good design? What are your thoughts on it?
So because we're all a sophisticated audience about privacy, we all know that the accept all is going to be the one that it points you to, but it does it more in the way we're accustomed to than the example you had with the lower brown box. And so I think the vote here is going to be, oh, it's less problematic, but that's because we're more sophisticated than the average user.
Any other thoughts?
I agree with what you said. I think this is maybe less critical or dangerous. I mean, I've been in a presentation where they defined gray patterns, and we talked about this. So there is white patterns and dark patterns, and the way in the middle. So I would call this a gray pattern because it's less nudging. But I mean, as you said, for someone who is in a hurry or just going, I mean, sometimes, I would click on this or just click an intro without really reading, because sometimes we don't do. So it still have that directive, let's say, manipulation in a way. So, yeah.
Anyone else?
One question. So is the reject all here is really rejecting all, or again is doing reject non-essential? Because for some they do not need consent, and here they are not informing that despite saying reject all, they are going to use some cookies.
Are you talking about this one or the previous one? Sorry.
This one.
Yeah. So, could you please repeat that again?
In the reject all, are they really rejecting all cookies and not using cookies, or it's just reject essential in functionality? Because for some cookies you do not need to have consent, and I think they are still using those, but giving the wrong impression that if you say reject all, we are not using cookies.
So that's a really good point. If anyone of you observe this point, which I really wanted someone to actually observe it, that if is it reject all, then it should have accept all, reject all, and then customize option. But why there's a cross button at the top? does this mean that if I cross, there won't be any cookie? Or if I say reject all, would there be any still cookies? And if I say accept all, would that add additional tracking? So it's kind of a vague over here that what exactly being done if I press accept all, reject all, or cross button. So that's a really good point, and I wanted to actually someone to observe that as well.
Yeah, what I'm missing is the option to accept only the necessary cookies. And according to the GDPR, we have the privacy by default principle, and that is somehow not mapped by this interface, that you have the least intrusive option as well as an option to choose. And yeah, I must also say that I've also frequently fallen for such cookies because we know privacy is not the primary task of users, and I also detected myself that I quickly sometimes click on the button that is highlighted and then immediately regret it because that is actually not what I was intending to. So yeah, so highlighting is really a dark pattern, according to my opinion. Thank you.
I just want to add a point which you mentioned. So I actually, when I started working on dark patterns, I started the user study as well. And what I observed is that people who are now in the field of cybersecurity or like work in really critical infrastructures, their behaviors are now shaped in a sense that even having a reject all button, they always accept the accept all button as well. So it's how their behavior have shaped over the period of time that they all, irrespective whether they have all these three options or not, they end up intentionally accepting because this is how their mind has been trained, I would say.
I know that there are, okay, I know that there are some extensions that I haven't looked into much that are supposed to like interact with these cookie dialogues and such for you. And have you looked into that at all and whether or not like they handle these dark patterns in an intelligent way, or you know how successful they are at that? I haven't except cursorily. So.
Okay, so if you're referring to those current studies which are more inclined towards automated kind of a solutions which can, just navigate those cookies, AI-based solutions which just navigate these kind of interfaces and accept or reject the cookies on your behalf, right? If that is something you are referring to. Yes. So I actually I met someone in the EuroSNP conference last week, and he was actually working exactly on the same problem of, designing an automated solution which can accept or reject cookies. So we had this really interesting discussion, and when I asked him that how do you balance, because the cookie banners has this a lot of text in it, and nowadays a lot of cookie banners have only manage or customize options and accept all. So having this AI solution where you have this really class imbalance sort of, or one class focus sort of a data set where accept all button is the one which is more, as in like the number of data points are more representing this kind of data set. So how do you balance or manage to do this? So he mentioned that this is a kind of a challenging element at the moment because a lot of the cookies that he managed to scrape have only accept all button. And now the problem is getting more and more difficult because of this cross button and double negatives, saying that refuse only non-essential or refuse only these cookies or something like that. So yeah, I have looked into it, and this space is getting more complex because of these design patterns. Just the interest of time, I just wanted to bring in the attention to this one as well, that previously Twitter just let you to navigate the pages or the link you want to without asking you to log in, but now it has this option that you need to sign in either through any other credentials like single sign-ons, or you need an account to look for the links or navigate pages. So it's more kind of like my take on this one is more like for having forced registration dark pattern, that it is asking you to give up on your data and credentials to navigate pages. Whereas if you really don't want to and just want to see the content or status on any of the page or the website, then you should have a freedom to do so. So do you still think that it's correct to have an account, like force you to have an account, or what are your take on it? As an end user, definitely.
take on privacy?
I mean, like, again, the point is that you need a registration, right? You need to do something to navigate the page. So in that context, don't you think so you as a user would have a freedom that without having an account or non-account holder, you can still see some of the content, if not the whole content or the privileges the one account holder is enjoying to have it? What's your take on it?
Yes, I do agree with that. But at the end of the day, they are still the platform that runs the content. And it's their choice to show what they want to do to the users who sign up and who don't sign up.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually had a question about this whole talk as a whole, also including this Twitter thing, which is maybe the dark pattern here is more like logging in or cookie consent forms on websites itself is the dark pattern. And instead, we should push this choice more on the client side, where browsers should have better UXs for selectively rejecting certain kinds of tracking systems like cookies, and instead of relying on kind of websites to be honest and comply with GDPR, et cetera, we could enforce that in some different way. And maybe that would be easier because the user only has to learn how to use one standard dialogue that the browser provides instead of many different strange dialogues that website owners might come up with. That's just a thought I had.
Is this your question or comment? Or I'm just sorry, I'm confused with that.
It was kind of on this whole like idea of like dark privacy patterns on websites. I was wondering whether maybe some of these things can be done on the browser instead of on the website.
I haven't looked into that space, but yeah, that's a good point. I'll definitely check on this one. And one final question, because I'm just running out of time.
I think interestingly, so if your previous slide, kind of building on his point. So I think the more interesting question for this one is what happens when you hit customize? Because these are very black and white, like accept all, reject all, right? But if you click on customize, it probably doesn't actually give you the option to fully reject all of them, right? So even if we go into our browser and we go customize, we unclick everything and we move on, and you look in your browser, that cookie's still there. Like they're dropping some cookies. It just may or may not be user login data, particular user strings. Like there are certain information that's still going to drop on your browser technically if you actually look at it. So I think from a dark pattern perspective, what actually happens when you click customize? Because for a normal user, they think they might have the illusion of choice, that you're actually getting to select all of them. And without actually closing your browser, flushing your browsing history, and clearing your cookies, refreshing the page and getting the menu again, I think that's where the illusion of choice comes in.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that having an illusion of as in data control and you can control your privacy is also one of the aspects of the dark patterns. I'll definitely look into this one, that if you have customized options, because again, different cookie banners have different customizations and different options, and sometimes even having a manage cookies option won't really help you, because it says that this is for sure. So you can't, opt out of a lot of information which you as a user want to have it, or you don't have that much level of freedom. So yeah, that's a good point. So shall I take one more question? Okay, go for it. Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, please. Mm-hmm. And it's all going to go into like my file anyway. So I feel like, I don't know, I think I hesitate to say this, but I'm not sure that I care at the end of the day. Like, I'm not sure that the end result is any different. As in, you mean like there are still cookies that even without having an account or sign in, they would still track you. That's for sure. Yeah.
One last question, and then we're going to break for coffee. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, just apropos perhaps to Eric's point, that on some level I think, and this was touched on, I mean, it is already there in your browser in the sense that you can just clear the history all the time. And personally, I use like multiple different browsers, and I use one browser that just doesn't, it literally is designed, doesn't hold history. I have another one that I use, and I clear the history every time I use it, and then I have other ones that I don't. And so, I mean, this is not, I don't mean to imply, oh, it's a solved problem. I'm saying to some extent it is in the browser. And yes, it would be great if there was a much easier interface where you could just, you know, have a couple of settings. But I mean, to some extent, there are people who have designed browsers with some control on that end.